In today's podcast, we're going to get a little dark here. We're talking about suicide prevention. We have a guest, Frank King. While we start, have you ever tried to attempt suicide and why?
Yes, actually, it's 2010. The speaking business has dropped off 80% overnight, practically. I've ridden my credit lines out as far as I possibly can. Had to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy, lost everything we'd worked for in 22 years of marriage. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Literally.
And for those of you guys out there, now Frank's a comedian too. Oh, he's got a bit of a dry humor like myself. So take everything with a grain of salt here. And I thought this topic would be good, especially since in commercial real estate, we've seen a correction of 15 to 50% across the country. You got loans coming due for renewals, and it's bad times if you invested in 2020 to 2023. If you're brand new out there, goodness gracious, count your lucky stars that you got born today as a new investor. Hey, this one's kind of going out to the folks that went into some deals at the wrong time or other times, things in your life going on. There's always multifaceted. Financial is just one part of it. Was this something that was running in your family, or maybe give us some context?
Oh, yes. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. And then if you're already hardwired for depression and suicide, as we are, and you're that close to an actual suicide as I was with my great aunt, then the chances of you seriously considering taking your own life later in life go up. And that's what happened when the bottom dropped out of the world financial market in 2008, 9, and 10.
Yeah, and I think some of us, just to put the obvious stuff to rest, I'd like to get your additional insights into it. People will say that when you lose hope, that's when you go into this type of mindset. It obviously is not very sane and out of this world that people would do this and leave their family behind in such a horrible circumstance. But you're somebody who's gone through it. Maybe what else can you enlighten for the folks listening, maybe going through difficult times or maybe being surrounded with people going through difficult times?
It's a bit of a myth that people who are dying by suicide don't think about their families because one of the three legs of the suicidality stool is burdensomeness. They feel like they are a burden to their family, friends, everybody around them. So it's from the inside looking out, it's an unselfish act. The world would be better off without me. From the outside in, obviously, it appears to be very selfish. I was going to kill myself because we had filed bankruptcy and it was devastating my wife. And I had $1 million life insurance policy. So I thought I can fix this. So I was thinking about her. She'd be brokenhearted, but she wouldn't be broke anymore. She'd have $1 million cash, tax free. So that's often the case with people as they figure the world would be better off if they weren't there.
Or if you're carrying debt and you haven't yet decided to go bankrupt, Chapter 11 or whatnot,
Mm,
that can be a way of erasing the debts for your family, right? Very
correct.
logical.
So it's a logical decision after a fashion. The problem was, or the good news was, that I sold insurance straight out of college. So I knew that most every insurance policy had a 2-year suicide clause. If you kill yourself, and by then things got a little better, bankruptcy went through, phone call stopped. I don't remember day 61 or 2 or 3 thinking, oh man, I could do it today. Fortunately,
And in these cases, is it normally premeditated like that? Sounds like it was. Is that
oh yeah,
normally
I
the
was
case?
practicing. I went to the bar with my gun to see if I could put it in my mouth and pull the hammer back. I was practicing, see if I could do it. Then I called my insurance agent to make sure it was okay, that my wife would get the money, and turned out she wouldn't. So I had to wait. Generally, there are moments when people just make a snap decision. I have a friend, or had a friend, who was fired from a rather high profile job. He worked very hard to get, and happened to be staying in a hotel on a higher floor, and just decided there was no hope and jumped, which is no good way to die, but jumping off a building because you have all that time to think about the mistake on the way down, I imagine.
In that example right there, I could imagine like the emotion would be being ashamed, right? Is that typically one of the driving motivators?
No, I don't think so.
Understanding it
Again,
was
the motivator, I do believe, is burdensomeness, that you feel like a burden to everybody around you. So, they'd be better off. I tell parents of children or teenagers who have these thoughts, just say to them every now and then, look, I'm sure it's crossed your mind. The world would be better off without you, but in no uncertain terms. would we ever be better off without you? Because that's what they're thinking. You want to join the conversation in their head, what they're thinking about.
And you mentioned like the conversation in your head. What's the lead up, right? The timetable, and maybe speak to the people that maybe the spouse of the person or a parent of the kid. How do you see these signs coming up?
Yeah, that's what I speak on is the signs and symptoms. Depression, eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, can't sleep, have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, so they're late for school or work, but rally in the afternoon like they're a different person. Let their personal hygiene go. That's a visual indication. Usually they're pretty well put together, but today the clothes dirty, hair's dirty. Maybe they're having trouble getting out of bed to run a little wash and take a shower. If you suspect they're depressed, or they tell you they're depressed, you have to ask them, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. Just flat out ask them. And if they admit it, then you say, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan and it's detailed, time, place, and method, you need to get them quickly to a mental health facility for evaluation to find out what's going on. Is it garden variety depression? Is it the depressive state of bipolar disorder? What exactly has sent them into this spiral?
And sometimes these spirals or what I call crucible moments where kind of life throws something at you and you pull yourself out of it can be some of the best learning opportunities and lead to new opportunities, especially in business. But as an outsider, like when is it that healthy experience? It's hard to tell, right? Like from an outsider's perspective, when is it healthy resistance and finally coming out of it? And when is it something that as an outsider, you need to do something about it if they don't tip you off, like how you just mentioned?
Then what I do is watch for their behavior. People who are suicidal have a number of behaviors. They talk about death and dying, you catch them Googling dying or how to die by suicide. They are getting their affairs in order, especially giving away prized possessions because they want to make sure the possessions go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone. If they're gathering the means to die by suicide, stockpiling medication or buying a firearm. And here's a really dangerous one is they've been depressed for a long time. Now they're happy for no apparent reason. And you're happy because they're happy. But they may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end. That's the thing that most people don't realize about suicide. It's not so much about wanting to kill yourself. It's about simply ending pain.
And that could be like tomorrow, that could be like months from now or next
Yeah.
year or
Yeah. It depends on your mental state, how bad things are, how much of a burden you feel like you are. There's also something called passive suicidality. Your kids talk about this or talk about this when they were kids. Things were so bad at home, trauma wise, they would pray that they didn't wake up in the morning. That's passive suicidality. They would never attempt it, but if they didn't wake up, that'd be fine.
yeah, tough. What other tips that you can give folks, either if people are going through it themselves or they're around somebody that you think we missed here?
If they're going through it themselves, they feel very alone. They feel like a burden. I would reassure them chances are they're not a burden to those around them, and those people around them will probably not be better off without them. My advice is A, have a physical, because sometimes physical ailments present as mental health symptoms. B, have an evaluation. Just get evaluated. If you're depressed, let's find out why. Like I said, it could be depression, could be the depressive state of bipolar. So you want to know what you're dealing with. And then if they suggest medication, I mean, I take a little medication. I think here's the thing. 1/3 of medication, psych meds work really well. 1/3 work okay for people, and the other third, it's horrible. So if your med doesn't work right away, there's a DNA cheek swab test you can take. And they take your DNA and they try to match it to the 2 or 3 psych drugs that would work best with your metabolism. So it takes away a lot of that go on, doesn't work, taper off, go on, doesn't work, taper off. You're not quite the lab rat that you are if you just, because the doctor generally only knows about the drug, what the drug salesman told him.
What about just generally talking to people? Is that can be
Yeah,
somewhat of a relief or
absolutely. Find a quiet place. Make sure you're in a good space. You're not sick. You don't have an appointment backed up against it. And it's not so much talking as listening and listening non-judgmentally. Don't bring your philosophy or religiosity to the meeting. You want to meet them where they are. And listening is a big part of it. But again, the private place where they feel comfortable to talk, you got plenty of time, you're not sick, so you're on your game. It can be very helpful.
Yeah. And I think most people are aware enough to not to be judgmental in that situation. But I think what, especially with a lot of type of personalities here, if you approach somebody in this situation, I think the urge might be to problem solve and find solutions. That's not something you want to be doing here.
Yeah, it's not your problem to fix. It's your issue to suggest. As I said, suggest getting a physical, suggest having a mental health evaluation, not checking into a psych hospital necessarily. Have an evaluation, find out exactly what it is, because there are psych drugs that are very effective. I didn't take any until I was 60. And then after that, I wondered why I hadn't done it before, because it doesn't make me giddy, but it just takes the edge off just enough to get me through the afternoon.
Any other tips you think we missed out might be very beneficial for some folks here?
Yeah, you're looking for patterns. Like I said, if you catch them talking about death or dying, or let's say death and dying appears in their artwork or their music or their writing, that's an indicator they may be considering ending their life. How are their finances? A life-changing event can trigger it. Bankruptcy, divorce, things like that can trigger it. But there may be an underlying mental illness, and something catastrophic like that can trigger it or trigger thoughts of doing it more sooner than later.
So you work with people based on your experience walking them through this and other parts of life. What's your URL in case people want to get a hold of you?
It's a mental health comedian. And I don't tell jokes about suicide, but I do tell funny personal stories when I speak because it's a really difficult topic. And if you give a little comic relief, it goes down a lot easier. It's easier to take than, and oftentimes when I speak, there's a line of people afterwards who want to share a story because I get up and talk about my mental illness and my near suicide and my crazy family. And it gives them permission to open up about it to somebody, finally.
Yeah. Sorry for everybody if it dampened your day. Thought it made sense coming out of this bearish market. We felt it in commercial real estate. And then also, I wanted to take the time to also introduce our new podcast. It's a sister podcast to the Wealth Elevator, where we will focus more on these types of personal development, mindset, personal health, and wellness. It's entitled The Rich Life. So if you guys go on iTunes, Google Play, or YouTube podcasts, or we'll put it on the YouTube channel too, you can Google The Rich Life or just email us, team@thewealthelevator.com, and we'll be in more of that segmented topics in that arena there. But wanted to get this very poignant topic across to everybody here and to use it as an opportunity to announce that brand new podcast. But Frank, any parting words for folks? Anything we missed?
Yes, 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide in the US nowadays are men, most 45, 54, and it's generally with a job change. If AI and robotics ruined your job, you're no longer a shop steward in a manufacturing plant. That's very dangerous for men because men tend to tie their identity to their job. If you're a football player and you've been a star since Pop Warner football, and all of a sudden you blow out a knee and you're no longer a football player, then you wake up the next morning, who the hell am I? That's a dangerous point in many men's lives, is that transition from what they were to what the possibilities are. Although women attempt 3 times as often as men, but men tend to complete because they use a firearm.
Yeah, a lot more messy guys are. Women tend to care more about how the looks after.
Yes,
Oh,
and you yourself, you're not probably not coming back. If you take pills and you can still got time to call 911, just a difference in the methods.
yeah. But Frank hit on the head. That's you guys out there. That's most of the listeners are male here, exactly within those age ranges. And you're going to change jobs. You accept it, but I think that's the cognitive dissonance that happens when you go through those life transitions, which will happen.
And men, toxic masculinity, men tend not to reach out for help because they're men. We're tough. And so if you're a man and you're struggling with this, my advice would be that there's no shame in reaching out for help. You hear people all the time after somebody dies by suicide. I would have done anything for him. I just wish he had reached out.
And that's why I say maybe this is a shameless plug for our family office group, but not many men find new friends after the age of 30, let alone 40, and
Yep.
especially on the same financial path. So that's the community that we've created there. To get more information on that, go to thewealthelevator.com/FOOM. And especially when people come to our events, I always say, look, nobody knows you here. You can be who you want. You can divulge what you want. Ain't nobody gonna care because nobody's likely to see you again. So I think that's what usually ties us back into growing new relationships because we're stuck with them. And I think this is what's hard about living on an island in Hawaii, right? Everybody, you don't want to make an ass of yourself because everybody knows who you are. But it's like Frank's saying, that's not really ideal circumstances when you're going through life's ups and downs like that. But with that, check out that new podcast we're doing, The Rich Life. Check out Frank's URL. Again, his other one is how to make money speaking.com, since he was a TED speaker and they didn't allow him to use TED anymore. That's why it's a different URL now. But thanks for jumping on, Frank. And thanks everybody for listening. And we will get back to money, taxes, investing next week.